Hey everyone, Jay here. This is a last call to get 50% off my on-demand videos. If you or someone you know might have interest in my Yoga Modules continuing education course, my online workshop Gentle is the New Advanced, or my self-practice video series, this is a good time to take advantage of a May promotion. You can get 50% off until the end of this month. Use promo code MAY50. That's 50% off any of my on-demand videos. Use promo code MAY50. You can find it at jbrownyoga.com. All right, now you've done it. You've hit play. And here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Are you new here? Is this your first time listening? If so, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How are we doing this week? How are you feeling? Can we have a pain check? I need to have a pain check. I don't know about any of you, but this last week, I had kind of a somewhat major pain flare-up. And long-time listeners know dealing with pain and being honest about that is something that I've been doing on this show since its beginning. And crazy thing is that this pain that I have is a pain that I know. It's one that I had many, many years ago that really tormented me, and I got through it and I learned something important from it, and I haven't had this pain in my body in this particular area, and I can't even remember how long. And it's strange. It's not like I did anything in particular that I could recognize. Maybe when I was racing my daughter, if you were here and I told you about my race with my daughter on Mother's Day and I fell, like it could have been that, but I certainly didn't feel anything at the time or even the day after. It's not like I noticed that when I fell, I hurt my neck. Like I felt fine. It didn't even hurt like at the time. So I don't really think it had anything to do with that. I think part of it is just that I'm a little bit run down. I think I've been, teaching too many classes and just pushing myself a little too hard and not having enough downtime. Not like I always have a lot of options, but I think sometimes I'm not giving myself the necessary recovery downtime that I need. And if I don't do that for long enough, it catches up with me at a certain point, and the universe just puts me down and says, sorry, dude, you're done. You're done. So I feel like that happened a little bit this week, and I've been managing it well, but it does unsettle me. It's like, wow, these are so deep, these patterns. It's like you think at some point you're past it. And I guess I am on some level. I'm certainly not suffering in the same way now as I was when I last had this pain. But it does feel like a deep patterning that comes round again. I don't know. In any case, I hope you're doing okay. I hope your pain levels are all right and that you're doing okay in your life. And I hope that if you are teaching yoga classes, they are thriving, that you've got people coming to class and that you're enjoying being a yoga teacher. If you've been around, I've been talking to a lot of different folks, trying to find out what's going on out there in the world. And I think there have been some things that have emerging, as I think I was talking about the other week. I think one thing that really stands out to me is that some of my preconceived notions, some of my own personal baggage around things like hot yoga or the phrase boutique fitness. I think in the past, if you said the words boutique fitness, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And I think there was good reason back then for me to have that view. And I think you can still make a strong case, and maybe it's something we'll discuss today some and maybe in future episodes about whether or not certain fitness things can be complementary to yoga, which of course they can. But are there some aspects to fitness training and certain kinds of working out that are actually counterproductive and make it harder for people to learn yoga? So in any case, I've had all kinds of stuff in the past where I think I really had opinions about it, let's just say. And they have changed some. In 2025, the idea of boutique fitness and where yoga fits into it isn't the same. It's not the same as it was when I last considered the even notion of those two things going together. So for whatever that's worth, that is very much what we will be discussing some today with my guest, Abby Hoffmann. And Abby is not just here to talk about boutique fitness. We'll get to that. But also, Abby is somebody who has run in parallel UK yoga circles to me. So as I was kind of going through my whole different stages and owning a center and then not owning a center and doing teacher training and all the things that I often have talked about here over the years, the evolution of yoga into the mainstream, as I like to say. Well, Abby rode that same wave, except she was on the other side of the pond. And it was really great to meet her and get her perspective. And she has recently opened a center called Yantra Studio in Norwich. And I don't want to give too much away, but she made some interesting choices. And we had, I think, a very interesting conversation about them. And I am very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you are enjoying the show and you would like to support it, please consider becoming a podcast premium subscriber. I'm not running any ads, so I'm relying completely on listener support. And for as little as $5 a month, not only do you help support the show, but you also get access to the full-length archives, which is quite a resource. So if you are in a position to support in that way, please consider becoming a podcast premium subscriber. If you want to connect with me in other ways, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. I've got ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group. I've got a teacher training, so you can find out about Podcast Premium and all the rest at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think we will leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side on a few things, but let's go ahead and get into it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Abby Hoffmann. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, Abby.
Hello, Jay. Good to speak with you.
And good to speak with you. It's a pleasure. I know you've listened to the show before, but I'll say just in case, we're already recording, so let's consider ourselves having begun, all right?
Okay, perfect.
Very good. I am happy to have a moment with you. Your name has come up on the show before. The yoga room has been mentioned. And I don't know why it took till now. Let's give a shout out to Divya for bringing us together.
Yes.
And I do think it's good timing. I think I know why Divya thought of you as a guest for the show at this time, because I have been doing this kind of assessment period of trying to figure out if it's still possible to have like an independently owned yoga center and how things are now, because there's been such a big contraction. And it does seem like people are sort of putting it out there and trying to make a go of some things. And I didn't really know that you had opened, Yantra Studio just last year, right?
Yeah, in September last year.
Okay, because I opened my place in October of last year. I opened a
Okay.
new place, which I swore I would never do after having a place for
Me
10
too.
years. We said we would never do it again. And here we are doing it
Absolutely.
again. Why are we
I
doing it
know.
again? So,
Wow, that's a good question,
yeah,
Jay, and I'm
so
sure we're going to delve into it.
exactly. So that's why I think it's taken till now. Sometimes I feel like there's other things at work as to when I speak to people and why, and it feels like now's the right time for us to come together. So I'm so happy for this. Thank you for making the time.
Oh, pleasure, honestly. Yeah, I was a little bit sort of taken aback because, as you know, I had a podcast myself. So I'm used to interviewing people, but this is, I think, the first time I have been on someone's show. So, yeah, exciting.
I see. So, but you know what it's like from the other side of trying to like jump on a call with someone maybe you've never met before and like connect
Yeah.
with them and have a conversation and turn that into a podcast. So you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because my reason for starting the Yoga Room podcast was obviously I had a studio called the Yoga Room, but I just kind of wanted to talk to some people that I had grown up in yoga with. So, for example, Norman Blair, who I know has been on your show a couple of times, Claire Missingham, who's a very old friend of mine. I'm sure you've heard of her, but just people that I felt, had really contributed something to the yoga landscape, and I knew we would have interesting conversations, but I knew most of them, so it wasn't like I was doing a cold, oh my god, who are you? I think I had a couple. I'd never met Amber Jean, who was the rocket girl on my podcast, Amber, but that was great, and we've become friends since then.
Yeah,
Which is
sometimes it can
lovely.
happen like that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, where to start with opening yoga centers? I was listening actually just before because I was doing my research, clearly, listening to your talk with Jonathan Satin, who obviously, has a place in my heart because Tri Yoga was one of the first places I went to practice yoga in 2000 when it opened. So I was very interested to hear his take and your questions to him and your conversations. I thought that was great. Thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I haven't checked back in with home if their doors have opened quite yet or
Oh
not.
no, not yet.
I kind of got a sense that it might have taken a little longer than he was hoping, but I imagine at some
I
point they'll get it
I
together.
think from what I can tell, they've pushed it back to June. So
I
we'll see.
see. I
Hopefully, I'm
see.
I'm really really excited to see what they've done there.
Well, that's an example for me of it seems like he has a similar impulse as many of us of trying to kind of, not try to go backwards, but recapture something of what we did in the
Mm,
past that worked and was
mm,
special. And it still
mm.
kind of remains to be seen whether it's going to work now, but we're trying.
Well, I'll just share, in the short time I've been open, and similarly to Jonathan, I wanted to bring something very, really good, really high quality, great teachers, great environment, all of those things to Norwich, where I live, which is not London. And I guess we'll talk a bit about that kind of metropolitan versus regional, as we say here in the UK. I don't know what you call the kind of
Hmm.
outer parts of the big cities, but we're definitely not a big city. We're kind of not tiny town, um, but yeah. So there was something about that, wanting to bring that traditional where I experienced yoga to begin with, that high quality in that place, where people could go and just feel like, oh, I'm taking an hour for myself or however long, and it's really good.
Mm. Yes, but I have to say, I was on your website checking out the Yantra Studio
Oh yeah.
offerings,
Mhm.
and it's very different than like when we first started to go classes. They're
Oh
just
yeah. Oh yeah.
like the modern iteration of what you're talking about is different.
Yeah.
And I guess before we get into what you're doing right now, I
Mm,
am curious to go back a little bit. It is the kind
mm.
of I don't know protocol for me with the show, especially when someone
Mhm.
hasn't been here before. I kind of want to know how you got to what you're doing now. And I was
Sure.
looking, and it's from what I could tell, you opened the yoga room in 2004. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I left London. London, born and bred. Well, not born, but bred most of my life. And I was very much a product of that kind of late '90s kind of crossover from a dance movement background. Very well-worn path. I'm sure lots of your guests have had that
Hmm.
experience. And then working in London, working in journalism, funnily enough, not dance at that point, but getting into Ashtanga yoga, which was really, where we all started, I think, us people with that physical kind of background. So yeah,
and that was with
sorry.
I read with John Scott and Hamish. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, actually, no. My very first Ashtanga teacher was a wonderful guy called Nigel Jones, who was a direct student of John Scott, and he was just teaching at the local gym. Very tall man, but beautiful practice. I remember seeing him jump through with straight legs, all 6'4" of him or something, and thinking, "Wow,
yes.
that guy's really got it."
Yes.
So yeah, just in the gym, and I'd recently had a baby, so 97. My son's now 28 this year, and it was that kind of the door that everyone walks through. Like, I want to get fit, I want to get strong, and it was very different. This yoga practice. I had done some yoga as a dancer back in the 80s, actually, and I don't know what it was, probably Iyengar. But it was just, it was just a passing thing. It was like a stretch class or something that I did additionally to my dance. But this was very different. And again, we're going back to those days where there weren't any yoga centers. We didn't have, we might have had the Life Center. I think that might have been the only one. But, you had to go to somewhere like Hamish's, a little place before he had the Shala on Drummond Street, where Ashtanga Yoga London are now. He was in a place called the Diorama. And this was a little kind of art centre tucked away back of some buildings in Euston, not far. And it was like carpet on the floor, a bit skanky, actually. But that's where we all went. And we went and did our practice. And I learned from him. Yeah.
And it was was he doing like a Mysore room kind of thing? Was he?
Yes.
I think that's a really significant moment that we've started at, because I remember that shift too. I remember it's right when I got to New York yoga scene, probably like 1992. It had just happened.
Oh, wow.
Where previously, like you said, like yoga was really not, it wasn't even thought of as a fitness thing. Like, yes, sometimes it was stretching, but sometimes it was like, it was thought more of meditation and like a counterculture mystical thing or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, the Jiva Muktis were really the kind of start of that, I guess, in New York, of bringing it more into the performative, more into the, the cool. I never went to Jiva Mukti in New York.
I started there, and I started on 2nd Avenue in 1992. So that's right when it happened. And what I think was significant to me, it was that it's just a precursor to yoga being in the gyms, because prior to that point, nobody thought of yoga as sweaty.
No, exactly.
But those Mysore rooms were sweaty, weren't they?
Oh my God. Well, I go back to that skanky even. It was a bit like fetid, the floor, the carpet. I used to look at it and go, oh God, thank God my mat's here. I don't have to be on that carpet. But then he moved and it was all lovely and wood floors and everything. So I started then, and I got very serious very quickly. I mean, I came from a dance background, so obviously I had that physical, I was physical, and I could do the practice. And I guess a lot of dancers do self-select into yoga for that reason. But that wasn't the reason I stayed, and it's certainly not, the reason I'm still here. But then we got to like the 2000s. So I was practicing London. And then I decided to leave London. I just had this kind of very random feeling that I needed to get out and look at another life, outside of the environment I'd known. So I moved to Norwich, which is in the east of England.
Had you already started? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but had you started teaching before you left?
Yes. So my teaching career started very accidentally. I didn't want to be a yoga teacher. I remember thinking or saying, actually, no, that's not for me. It's, I'd have to memorize all that Sanskrit, and I just don't feel like it was upon me to do that. But then I was going to a class, another gym class, and another very early Ashtanga teacher. I was going to her classes, and she got stuck in traffic one day and she couldn't teach. She wasn't there. So it was that classic moment. Everyone's eyes just looked to me and they went, well, you seem to know what you're doing. Come on, you teach it.
Right.
So I did. And the rest, as they say, is history. But I didn't have a certificate. I didn't have a qualification because, again, there wasn't the proliferation. I'm sure we'll talk about this as well. There wasn't the proliferation of teacher trainings. So a lot of my friends who were then Ashtangis, they didn't have a certificate. They probably had gone to Patabi Joyce in Mysore, or they had assisted maybe someone like Gingy. I'm sure you know of Gingy. But it was a very small pool of people who were teaching.
Right.
So I left London, no teaching certificate, but I had, lots of experience, and I just kind of started teaching in Norwich, and there was no Ashtanga here, so I'd sort of cornered the market, I suppose.
Right.
Well, that was my thinking. I was like, yeah, I'll set up, and it'll be really successful.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting what you're saying. You made the move out of the city probably much earlier than others of us did. Like I did that, but it was like 2017. Like I stuck it out for a long time.
Wow. Well, that was good.
I did 10 years basically from 2007 to 2017 because I had a center in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's right.
I guess you left the city earlier, and you said you were the first person to sort of start teaching Ashtanga in Norwich, you said, right?
Norwich. Well,
Norwich, forgive me.
Kind of Norwich, yeah. There's actually a Norwich.
All your countrymen are rolling their eyes at the way I pronounce it. Forgive me.
No, oh, don't worry. We have so many weird names in Norfolk because we're actually in the county of Norfolk. Names that are kind of unpronounceable to people who don't know. Like we have a place called Haysborough, but it's spelt Happisburgh. So it's, and that's a weird one. There's also a place in North Norfolk called Stiffkey, spelt, Stiffkey, but the correct pronunciation is Stookie. So if you call it Stiffkey, people look at you and go, you're not from around here, are you?
That's the tell.
So anyway, where were we? I'd moved to Norwich.
You were the first person to start teaching Ashtanga that you know of, at least in Norwich.
Well, not quite, because I got here all kind of, hey, I've arrived. And I realized there was another teacher, a woman who I'm now very, very good friends with, who incidentally ended up living in Brooklyn. Okay. Her name's Hayley Winter. And she is, her organization is Yoga Sports Science. She's very, very well thought of in the kind of yoga and performance enhancement area. But she was teaching because she had been to a teacher and started setting up some classes. So together we kind of forged an alliance and set up classes, and they were really well received. People did really want to practice. They were very enthusiastic.
There was lots of people showing up to classes at that time, I think.
And sorry, interestingly, I mean, I guess, we're in a place now, and you were talking to Jonathan about this, how are you going to find people? You're going to go out on the street, you're going to do flyers, blah, 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 blah. Well, we had no social media, obviously. It was 2002. So it was flyers, it was word of mouth. And actually the word of mouth was the thing that I think worked the most. People would be like, hey, this is great, I'm going to bring my friend next week. That's kind of how I started.
Yes. And at that time, I've said this many times on this show, and I'm guessing it was true in your experience as well, that the way that you kind of marketed yourself was through like showing that you had authentic practice, which sometimes meant connecting to a lineage tradition of one or the other. Like there was yoga masters, and that was what kind of gave you credibility. So were you really billing yourself as an Ashtanga teacher? Were you going to Mysore or to study with Patabi Joyce?
Oh, no, that didn't come until a bit later. And I certainly didn't bill myself as a master or anything like that. I was very clear that, I was just a student passing on, what I had learned and experienced and what I thought was great. And I kind of resisted the whole Mysore thing, to be honest. I remember, I went to the big, the Brick Lane equivalent to the Puck building, I suppose, those gatherings, went to those.
If people don't know what you're referring to, there's a location in New York City where Patabi Joyce came and taught like 600 people or something, if I recall. It's like huge.
Yeah, and he came to London and he did those tours, the world famous last ever tour. It was always the last one, but they carried on.
Yeah.
But I was a little resistant. I guess I'm a little bit of a, I don't know whether I'm not a traditionalist, but I certainly wasn't like, I'm only doing it this way. I can't, do it any other way but how Patabi teaches. But eventually I did go, and that would have been 2006. And I just went the once, and I went for a month, and I had a wonderful time, met with some wonderful people, ate some wonderful meals, and yada yada. But I wasn't kind of in that whole circle of, you've got to get authorized and do all of that stuff.
So you weren't invested in that, in getting authorized or certified or any of that stuff?
No, not at all. I did eventually do a certification. I did that in London at the Life Centre, what's now Yoga Campus, and that was a very well thought of training alongside Tri Yoga. It was a kind of similar time. They both set up their teacher trainings. So I was very glad and grateful I'd done that. But I had been a dancer, and I had been teaching dance, and I understood and knew, number one, how to be in front of a group of people. Number two, some things about the body, although not everything. And I've certainly learned so much in these last, 30 odd years of practicing and teaching.
Mm-hmm. I saw in your bio, it said PhD in yoga and dance. Did you study yoga like in like an academic kind of study, or is that just like the PhD of being a yoga teacher for all these years, which counts in my book?
No, Jane, no. So I did my first degree in dance studies, and I'm sure, in America you have similar programs. You have the conservatoire, the professional dance training. Juilliard, I guess, would be one example in New York, and in England, in London, we have, the London Contemporary Dance School or the Royal Ballet, all those places. But I did a university degree, which was very much more a kind of very exciting actually at the time, and very kind of rooted in performance art and sort of more kind of crazy stuff, as well as the dance, and very alternative dance stuff. And I went back and I did my PhD there at the same place, Middlesex University. And what I did was I proposed that yoga be part of dancers training, professional dancers training, because when I started doing ashtanga, as we just discussed, I thought, wow, this is great. I'm getting very strong, and, it's really giving me a lot of clarity. And I just thought, I had a bit of a light bulb moment. What if dancers did this, and, then they would get less injuries? Or I don't know how I kind of thought about it, but I thought it'd be something interesting to explore. So I applied for a scholarship, which back then, I think we're talking 2005, they were still giving out. I'm pretty sure they're not now. So there was some money sloshing around for these things, and I got a scholarship, and I did 3 years on a full scholarship field work. So I worked with a group of dancers at that university, and we did some kind of qualitative study rather than any kind of experiment stuff. So I didn't put yoga under any kind of control groups or anything like that. I just
you didn't have them rate their pain on a scale from 1 to 10 every day, so you could show that the yoga was curing their back pain or whatever, right?
No, but there were some questionnaires. I did use some standardized stuff, and it was more about how the dancers felt emotionally and spiritually, and what the yoga practice was giving to them in terms of their artistry. And it was very positive, and I really learned a lot about yoga, because I also had to include a lot of context, a lot of background, a lot of history. So I looked into kind of where Mark Singleton, who I'm sure you know as well, scholar, his start point was for yoga body, looking at those practices in the 1900s, looking at how yoga and canon aesthetics intersected, how, the Mysore Palace was that kind of breeding ground for what we now know as ashtanga. So I looked at all of that, and I looked at the kind of more feminine aspect. I looked at the dance and yoga crossover. There was a big parallel with what Martha Graham, eventually was evolving into her technique, and she took a lot from yoga. And if you look at the postures, certainly, and the floor work in modern dance technique, modern Graham technique, there are so many places where you go, oh yeah, she's sitting in lotus, or she's taken some floor-based yoga posture and animated it. So it was very interesting. It was also very much a labor of love. It took me, I think, finally I graduated in 2011, I think, maybe even 2012, I don't know, but it was protracted. And of course, when you do a PhD, you've got to work, you've got to lecture. So I took a lecturing job, and that's when I let go of the yoga studio, because it's kind of impossible to run a business and work in other places and do studies. So yeah, that kind of ended then.
Well, that's interesting that it's interesting, the yoga and dance, because I always remember I would have lots of dancers coming to class, and I would always say the same thing to them. I had some dance training, like postmodern dance, like contact improv, and like did like Grotowski theater work. So we like rolled around on the floor and tried to induce trance states in us and stuff like that, But I would always say to dancers when they came, like my humble invitation was always that they think of their time in yoga practice as different than all of the other training they do for their dancing. That like so because like their artwork is so connected to their bodies, and that's like the instrument that they play, that you're used to kind of tuning the instrument or like conditioning the instrument in a certain way for that pursuit. And to kind of have your yoga practice not be about you being a dancer, be just you, not as a dancer, and then you'll go be a great dancer. You know what I mean? But
And Claire Missingham and I talked about this on the Yoga Room podcast about dancers coming to yoga, and number one, why they make good teachers most of the time, but number two, about what the yoga is for. And we discussed and we agreed it's for you, it's for them. It's like the breath, it's their breath. They're not breathing to perform a million fouettes or whatever, or pirouettes. It's their breath, and it's a profound kind of coming home, I think, for a dancer to, as you say, just use that instrument, that finely tuned, trained instrument, but for them, for their healing, for their benefit. And so that's kind of why I did the PhD, to help to put that out there in the field. And I'm really glad that I did.
Well, I find it intriguing because dancers are already strong and flexible in their bodies a lot of the times. So the yoga isn't about that. And yet getting strong and flexible was how yoga became popular in a way. Like I even read in your bio also, you too got to witness the way that yoga teachers kind of went from being underground to being celebrities. I saw that you like hosted Kino or whatever when she came, and like just like that was a scene, you know what I mean? Like at a certain point, there became kind of like rock star teachers.
Absolutely. I mean, God, you remember that? I mean, I don't know when the sort of pinnacle of all of that was, but there was Shiva Ray, Kino, all of those like big. A friend of mine and I joke about this. We call them the high end yogis. We did. I don't know how high their ends are anymore, but I certainly, Kino, was one of the first to have that YouTube channel, and she's really done a lot to popularize Ashtanga, which is great. But she literally kind of rang me up or emailed me one day and said, "Hello, I'm coming to the UK and looking for places. It's my first visit." And so she rocked up and did some demo, which was incredible. She demoed like the third series, and people were kind of like, "What? What the hell is she doing?" But she was super nice and super grounded at that time, and and probably still is. I have every reason to believe she hasn't changed in the years. Good luck to her.
Well, I absolutely, I feel the same. She's certainly been at it for a long time and inspired a lot of people. I guess I'm curious. My question around, I don't know, like the Ashtanga system, because I did do it for a time myself, but it did seem like trying to stick to that program of asana, at least in a kind of any sort of strict way. Like for some people that seems to work for years and years. Hamish is still at it or whatever to some degree.
I know. Yeah.
But how much do you think it has to change? Like, even when someone's still doing Ashtanga practice, they're not doing it the same in their 50s as they were in their 20s, right?
Well, of course not. But I mean, there's always been this tension in the Ashtanga world, community, whatever. And we only have to look at, there's the teachers like David Williams, Nancy Gilgoff as well, rest her soul, Danny Paradise. That group of teachers were never about do it this way, or, you have to you can't do X posture unless you can do Y posture. And there was much more of a kind of free approach to the practice, which, I very much on that side, because I think, if you go back to how it was originally taught before all of, the people went to Mysore and kind of, got really into it. It was one-to-one, or it was very small groups, and it was individualized. So, for example, there was a teacher called Derek Ireland who taught in the UK, in Brighton. So there was a big community in Brighton in the southwest. And he used to do the splits. And so in the sequence that everyone learned in Brighton, there was the splits, I think, in amongst the wide leg forward folds, the prasaritas. But, only because when he went to Mysore, that's what Pattabhi Jois told him to do, because he had very tight hamstrings, because he was a professional footballer. So I think there's all these ways in which, certain people have got into that line or that loop of like, it has to be done like this, and this. And if you're not doing it that way, then, you're not doing it right. But over time, and certainly, as Pattabhi Jois passed away and now Sharat, I think it's almost like a bit of a liberation from, you got to do it this way. I think people have realized that, and it can be a very beneficial practice for people. But yes, as you say, I think people adapt it and change.
Well, it seemed to me, again, I don't know from firsthand experience, because I haven't been like what I would consider in the ashtanga community over the years. But even earlier, you mentioned watching someone jump through with straight legs. And that was actually like a thing for me, because at some point I had a lot of facility. I could put my hands down and press up to a handstand and then lower down into chaturanga. Like I had all that facility, but I could never jump through with straight legs. And the reason is the proportion of my upper torso to my lower torso is such, it doesn't matter how much strength I have. I'm never going to make that clearance. It's never going to happen for me with straight legs. And I remember coming to that moment and being like, okay, well, if that's the idealized version that's impressing everyone, I'm never going to be able to do that.
And it all goes back to, as our knowledge and understanding of the body is unfolded, pre the sort of proliferation of a lot of information that has come, through the internet, but also like through people like Paul Griley. I think it was through him that I had that realization, like, oh, okay, well, people's bones are going to determine, or their proportions are going to determine how they execute a movement. But going back to your point about, doing the same postures, no, I think also, and this is another reason that I started the studio Yantra that I'm running now, is that I think people need to do different things. We need to move, we need to lift, we need to push, we need to pull. The yoga practice can be quite repetitive, and also I think, not always strength building. So I think, there's a way in which, yes, Ashtanga has its place. I definitely wouldn't be doing it 6 days a week. I definitely wouldn't, be sticking to just the postures from the primary series. And for that reason, I like practices like the rocket, because I think you get to mix it up and do different things, if that's your bag, if you're into...
I don't know what that is, but before you tell me what the rocket is, I don't want to talk totally, I don't go there yet, because I was curious. You mentioned about how you took a break away from teaching. You closed the center down, and you were doing the PhD thing and teaching or lecturing. How many years were you away from teaching? Were you still practicing? Like, what was that period of time like?
No, I was still teaching yoga. So that would have been like 2010 onwards. I just closed the yoga center, and I didn't, like you, I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm never going to open another yoga center, because number one, I wasn't making any money. It was very small. And I was interested I made a little note for myself, because I think you were talking on one of your shows, it might have been with Jonathan, about having punch cards.
Yes, I'm about to reinstitute them now. 10 class punch cards.
Yes, well, that's exactly what we had. We had punch cards, money in a tin, and then I remember getting all excited about, we can do bank transfers now. Maybe, that's going to change things. But the reality wasn't making any money. And I'm sure we'll talk about systems and stuff, but, there was no booking system. There was no, anything like that.
Had many other yoga centers opened up in the time that you had it? Did you see that happen? Or no, you were still kind of one of the only ones in your town?
Yeah. Dedicated yoga center, yeah. I mean, I've got to tell you now, there's loads, but back then it was just us. So no, I closed and I took several jobs lecturing part-time here and there. I was in London a couple of days a week. I was finishing up the PhD, and then I spent a year in Malta, funnily enough, on lecturing in their dance studies program, which was just starting out, or it had just started out then, so it was like 2013. And then kind of, I don't know, I did all kinds of different things to keep the wolf from the door. And then my last proper academic job, I was teaching in the conservatoire, so in the Rambert School. Rambert are one of the big dance companies, contemporary and ballet, and they have a school. And that was 2017. And then I kind of had enough. I burnt out like a lot of academics. I was just like, oh God, I can't mark any more essays. It's very, very full on. So I left that. And I'm going to kind of fast forward to 2019. And I decided then I was going to take some time off yoga teaching. And I consciously said, right, I'm not going to teach yoga for a year. I've had enough. So I had a really nice sabbatical break. And then
Which
you can
got
guess what
extended
happened.
because the world got closed down, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you beat me to it. And then when the lockdowns happened, everyone pivoted online. I didn't want to. I really didn't. I'm not a fan of teaching online. I've done a little bit of it, but I'm much happier in person. And I'm not very good at actually doing trainings myself online. I find that quite difficult. I have quite weak eyesight, so I struggle with looking at screens for periods of time. So that wasn't for me. So then I had another 2 years off, I think, until everything came back. Sorry, I don't know if you wanted me to go that far down the line.
It's good. It's mapping totally with my experience and many other people I've spoken to, especially even the 2017 to 2019 burnout period. Certainly was the case for me. I was like traveling all around trying to do kind of like the international circuit and just like
yes, I remember
just running myself into the ground. I remember like getting to Australia and like just being like I had all this massive chronic pain in my body. I was very honest about it. I wasn't like faking it like I didn't have it. I was very upfront, and I was teaching a therapeutic approach, so it was okay. But like, if you were running all around and teaching these big workshops, like, and doing like vigorous practice, a lot of teachers were in a lot of pain and they weren't letting people know.
Yes. Yeah, no, I can imagine. I should actually add as well, I left out a bit of the jigsaw. So I did start doing teacher trainings. After I finished my PhD, I turned it into a teacher training. I didn't really want to do academic articles and get published. So I wrote a teacher training which would enable dancers to be yoga teachers. And also for people who were not dancers to work with dancers. So yoga teachers who wanted, or people that wanted to train to teach yoga with a specific focus towards working with dancers. So I did that. And then I also did some general, like 200 hours. I did quite a few of those. But, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, Jay.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you, because I did it too, because that was for a time, like at the very beginning, we did make enough money off classes. I did, and privates. There was lots of private students, and I made more money then than I make now off just teaching classes, no teacher trainings. And then at some point, teacher training became if you had taught for long enough, and you became a little bit more of a senior teacher.
Yeah.
The proliferation of teacher training, as you said, certainly was a important evolution point for yoga, and we all started doing teacher trainings. What are your feelings about them? I have mixed feelings about 200-hour teacher trainings.
So much to say. Well, the first thing I'll say, and I don't know if you know this, maybe you do, but the 200-hour model, did you know that it was originally evolved to kind of fit the needs of medical students or medical practitioners who wanted to learn about yoga, to kind of bring it into their world. So they devised this sort of, format which would only have 20 hours or 30 hours of anatomy, because the doctors or the trainee doctors had already done like thousands of hours of anatomy. So that kind of explains why, you're kind of flung out.
I'll interrupt you only for a moment to say I did hear a different story. Like I've had Leslie Kavanaugh on who said he was in a room where, I mean, that might have happened as well. Like that makes a lot of sense. He mentioned that originally they were coming up with what were going to be like educational guidelines more than like a standard. But they kind of just came up with 200 hours out of nowhere. Like just came up with the number. It didn't really come from anything in particular.
No, it doesn't. And, maybe at the time it was something that the yoga world needed. I mean, in England, in the UK, prior to all of the 200 hour stuff, the only real yoga teacher training was the British Wheel of Yoga, which is much more than 200 hours. I think it's probably about 500 or 3 years or something, like equivalent of a university sort of length, but very much kind of rooted in a style of yoga that we sometimes laughingly call British safety yoga, very kind of slow, moderate, hatha yoga, but with this kind of real emphasis on being very, very safe and not, certainly not doing ashtanga. They very, very much frowned on that. But the explosion of teacher trainings and the necessity for studios to offer them, I think, is kind of where we're headed with this.
Right, because that was the only way you can pay the rent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it kind of is still. I think a lot of studios are using that, 10 people a year or 20 people a year, whatever, coming through their doors, £3,000 a pop, to give them
make up the difference on the classes that they lose money on.
Yes, but I've made a conscious decision, and it could be my financial undoing, but I'm not offering a 200-hour. I'm not offering a 300-hour at Yantra.
Well, see, that's interesting. That's why I asked you about how you feel about them, because what I observed, and I don't know if this is what you think, but when I started doing them for a long time, and of course, we did our best within the 200, 300-hour model. We taught at best we knew how to make the best possible teachers we could. But once it became about hours, and especially like having to fulfill the hours and schedule the hours, which is different than how we learned, where you just showed up every day for several years, and then your teacher said, I need you to cover for me or whatever, and then you became a teacher. This idea of like it being a set curriculum in advance. What happened, I observed, is it became a lot more about sequencing and poses and all about teaching how to do that rather than kind of like a transformational process that happens between a teacher and student sometimes.
Yes. And to that point, I would say, the sort of teacher training factory, if you like, that churns out a lot of teachers, I would say, with notable exceptions, that these people or these students that come out of these trainings do not have that experience, and therefore are not in a position to, facilitate or set up environments where people can transform, where people can have those genuine experiences. And then another point I want to make is that in my experience training people to be yoga teachers, I've observed some people they're just natural teachers. I couldn't teach them how to teach. They just came fully formed. I can think of several notable examples of that. People who didn't have a dance background. They just had that something in them that was natural and people connected to. And then there are people that come with lots and lots of experience of dance or martial arts, and maybe they're not so great in the space. So I don't know. Part of me is like, make it harder to be a yoga teacher, make it longer. I don't know. And then the other part of me is like, let's go back to apprenticeships. Let's go back to the olden days. Let's be like, maybe that's something I'll offer at Yantra. Maybe it's just going to be, hey, you want to be a teacher? Come do class. I'll tell you what I know, and you can cover for me. And if it works, then you're a teacher.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.